Imagine this. You're sitting in silence while everyone around you loses their minds. They're posting, they're reacting, they're explaining themselves to strangers on the internet. They're bleeding their thoughts, their emotions, their entire inner world for digital crumbs of validation. And you? You're watching. You're learning. You're building something they can't see. While they perform for applause, you train in darkness. While they seek understanding, you seek mastery. While they give themselves away for free, you're becoming expensive. This isn't antisocial behavior. This is warfare. Mental warfare, and the weapon is your focus. Machiavelli knew something about power that modern men have forgotten. He knew that the loudest man in the room is rarely the most dangerous. The most dangerous man is the one who says nothing, reveals nothing, and moves with surgical precision when the moment is right. Self-focus isn't selfishness, it's strategy. You think you understand power? You don't. You think power is being heard, being seen, being acknowledged. That's not power. That's desperation disguised as confidence. Real power is this. The man who reveals nothing cannot be manipulated. The man who needs nothing cannot be controlled. The man who explains nothing cannot be trapped. They talk too much. They feel too much. They give too much. They're addicted to reactions, allergic to silence, terrified of being alone with their own thoughts. They sell pieces of themselves for likes, shares, and comments, thinking exposure equals influence. But here's what they don't understand. Here's what Machiavelli tried to teach princes who were too weak to listen. The sword doesn't win wars. The strategy behind it does. And self-focus is that strategy. It's not the fake self-focus that posts inspirational quotes while seeking validation. It's the real kind. The kind rooted in discipline, forged in isolation, fueled by purpose. The kind that makes you unavailable to the world's chaos because you're too busy building something that will outlast the noise. Most men leak energy like broken pipes. Every argument they enter, every explanation they give, every reaction they have, it's all leakage, power leakage. And they wonder why they feel drained, distracted, constantly on edge. You don't owe them your energy. You don't owe them your time. You don't owe them your truth. Your silence is your armor. Your mystery is your weapon. When they can't read you, they can't use you. When they can't provoke you, they can't control you. When they can't predict you, they can't defeat you. This is why self-focused men terrify the world. Not because they're antisocial, but because they're uncontrollable. They operate on their own frequency. They set their own pace. They define their own worth. And that independence is more threatening to weak people than any weapon ever could be. Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But he wasn't talking about intimidation. He was talking about unavailability. The fear that comes from encountering someone who genuinely doesn't need your approval to know his value. You want to evolve? Start here. Stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Stop giving your attention to situations beneath your standards. Stop being available on demand to anyone who thinks they deserve access to your peace. Self-focus is warfare. And every moment you stay disciplined, every second you withhold reaction, every time you choose silence over noise, you become harder to predict and impossible to manipulate. If you're ready to weaponize your attention and build silent power that makes others uncomfortable, check the description below. This isn't about becoming antisocial. This is about becoming unstoppable. The question that will haunt you is this: are you ready to trade being understood for being powerful? Because you can't have both. Here's what they don't teach you in school. Here's what your parents never understood. Here's what every therapist, coach, and self-help guru gets completely wrong. Your need to be understood is killing you. Not metaphorically. Literally. It's strangling your potential, poisoning your decisions, and turning you into an emotional slave for anyone smart enough to push your buttons. Carl Jung saw this coming. He warned that modern man would become neurotic from seeking external validation instead of internal integration. He called it the persona trap. The mask you wear to get approval becomes the prison that destroys your authentic power. But Jung was being polite. The truth is more brutal. Your desperate hunger for understanding makes you predictable. Predictable men get used. They get manipulated. They get discarded when they're no longer useful. And they never see it coming because they're too busy performing for applause. Nietzsche understood the sickness. He called it herd morality, the psychological disease that makes you seek consensus instead of truth, comfort instead of strength, acceptance instead of excellence. He knew that most men would rather be wrong with the crowd than right alone. And that preference? That's where they trap you. Every time you explain yourself to someone who hasn't earned your explanation, you're teaching them how to manipulate you. Every time you seek approval from people who don't respect you, you're advertising your weakness. Every time you react emotionally to provocation, you're handing over control of your nervous system. This isn't an accident. This is engineering. The modern world has weaponized your social instincts against you. Social media algorithms profit from your insecurity. The news media feeds on your emotional reactions. Consumer culture thrives on your sense of inadequacy. Even your relationships often become transactions where you trade authentic power for temporary comfort. Schopenhauer saw the game clearly. He wrote that most human interaction is just elaborate manipulation disguised as connection. People don't want to understand you. They want to use understanding as leverage. They study your weaknesses not to help you, but to exploit them when convenient. This is why strong men throughout history learned to conceal their thoughts, not because they were ashamed, but because they understood that revealing your hand gives your enemies ammunition. Every emotion you display is intelligence. Every need you express becomes a weapon against you. The philosophers call it the fundamental attribution error. You judge yourself by your intentions, but others judge you by your reactions. And if your reactions are predictable, you become controllable. Marcus Aurelius knew this. In his private journals, he wrote about the importance of maintaining inner discipline precisely because the external world would always try to pull you into chaos. He understood that the moment you make your peace dependent on external circumstances, you've lost the war. But here's what kills most men. They mistake emotional availability for strength. They think vulnerability equals authenticity. They believe that sharing their struggles makes them relatable and therefore powerful. Wrong, dead wrong. In a world full of predators, bleeding attracts sharks. Your emotional transparency doesn't make you authentic. It makes you prey. Your willingness to explain yourself doesn't make you mature. It makes you manageable. Viktor Frankl discovered this in the concentration camps. The men who survived weren't the ones who expressed their pain. They were the ones who found meaning in their suffering without broadcasting it. They turned inward, not outward. They became fortresses, not fountains. This is the hidden problem. You've been trained to believe that internal focus is selfish, that mystery is antisocial, that silence is weakness. But those beliefs serve everyone except you. The truth is more uncomfortable. In a world that profits from your emotional labor, self-focus isn't selfishness, it's rebellion. In a culture that demands transparency, privacy becomes revolutionary. In an environment designed to make you reactive, discipline becomes your greatest weapon. Most men will never accept this. They're too addicted to being understood, too dependent on external validation, too afraid of being alone with their own thoughts. They'll stay slaves to other people's opinions until they die. But understanding this psychological trap is only the beginning. The real question is, what happens when you refuse to play by their rules anymore? You want to know what really happens when you stay trapped in the understanding game. Let me show you the hidden cost. You wake up tired. Not physically tired, mentally drained. Because you spent yesterday explaining yourself to people who weren't listening. You justified decisions to people who had no right to judge them. You gave emotional energy to situations that deserved nothing from you. This isn't burnout. This is systematic energy theft. Neuroscience has a name for this. Cognitive load theory. Your brain has limited processing power. Every time you engage with low-value interactions, every time you react to meaningless provocations, every time you try to convince someone who's committed to misunderstanding you, you're burning mental calories that should be invested in building your empire. The confirmation bias kicks in. You start seeking people who validate your struggles instead of people who challenge your limitations. You surround yourself with emotional support groups that keep you comfortable but never push you to evolve. You become addicted to sympathy instead of hungry for strength, and the world notices. People can smell desperation from miles away. They sense when you need their approval. They feel when you're emotionally available. And the predators? They circle like sharks around blood in the water. Your boss knows you'll work late because you need to be seen as valuable. Your friends know you'll always be available because you're afraid of being left out. Your romantic interests know they can keep you on emotional standby because you're terrified of being alone. This is what the psychology textbooks don't tell you. Emotional availability creates power imbalances. The person who needs less always controls the person who needs more. Always. But here's where it gets sinister. The system is designed to keep you needy. Social media algorithms show you content that triggers insecurity. Dating apps create artificial scarcity to keep you paying. The news cycle feeds you problems you can't solve to keep you anxious and distracted. Even your education system taught you to seek external validation instead of internal mastery. You're not failing at the game. The game is rigged against you. Cultural conditioning runs deeper than you think. From childhood, you were rewarded for being agreeable, punished for being distant, praised for sharing feelings, and shamed for keeping secrets. They trained you to be transparent because transparent people are controllable people. The dopamine hits from likes, comments, and shares literally rewire your brain to crave external validation. You become psychologically dependent on other people's reactions to feel good about yourself. Your self-worth becomes outsourced to strangers who don't care if you live or die. Meanwhile, the men who understand self-focus are building in silence. They're not posting their plans. They're not seeking validation for their choices. They're not explaining their methods. They're moving like ghosts while you're performing like clowns. And when they emerge from the shadows with results you can't ignore, you'll wonder how they did it so quietly, so efficiently, so ruthlessly. The answer is simple. While you were bleeding energy on explanations, they were investing it in execution. While you were seeking understanding, they were building understanding-proof systems. While you were trying to be liked, they were becoming undeniable. The gap between you and them isn't talent. It's focus. It's discipline. It's the willingness to be misunderstood while building something that will make misunderstanding irrelevant. This is the hidden consequence of the understanding trap. It doesn't just drain your energy. It hands your power to people who haven't earned it and don't deserve it. But what if you could reverse this? What if you could become the man who takes energy instead of giving it? What if you could build such unshakable internal focus that the world starts orbiting around your frame instead of you chasing theirs? Here's your declaration of war against weakness. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop being available on demand. Right now, today, this moment. Machiavelli didn't write pretty advice. He wrote survival manuals. And his coldest lesson is this. The prince who tries to be loved by everyone gets destroyed by everyone. But the prince who focuses solely on his mission becomes untouchable. Your rebellion starts with 3 brutal cuts. Cut the need to be understood. Kill it, strangle it, bury it so deep it never resurfaces. You don't owe anyone your thoughts. You don't owe anyone your reasoning. You don't owe anyone access to your inner world. Your mind is a fortress now. Gates locked. Drawbridge up. When they ask why you're different, say nothing. When they demand explanations, give silence. When they accuse you of being cold, distant, arrogant, let them. That's the tax of evolution. That's the price of freedom. Cut emotional availability. You are no longer a support system for other people's dysfunction. You are no longer a sounding board for people who refuse to solve their problems. You are no longer an emotional dumping ground for anyone who thinks your peace is their playground. When they try to bait you into drama, walk away. When they seek sympathy for self-created problems, become unavailable. When they demand your emotional labor, make them pay with respect or get nothing. Cut the audience. Most people in your life are spectators, not investors. They watch your moves, judge your decisions, and offer opinions they haven't earned the right to give. Fire them, block them, make them irrelevant. Build in obscurity. Train in darkness, move in silence. Let them wonder what you're doing while you're becoming something they can't recognize. This is how historical giants operated. They didn't announce their plans. They didn't seek permission. They didn't explain their methods. They focused inward until they became undeniable outward. Napoleon studied in isolation for years before conquering Europe. Tesla worked in solitude before changing the world. Jobs disappeared from public view before revolutionizing technology. They understood that true power is built in shadows and revealed in results. Your new operating system: observe more, react less, listen more, speak less, build more, explain less. When disrespected, respond with silence. When tested, respond with distance. When baited, respond with absence. Your non-reaction becomes more powerful than any retaliation. This isn't antisocial behavior. This is strategic behavior. You're not avoiding people. You're becoming selective about which people deserve your energy. You're not being mysterious for show. You're protecting your power from those who would waste it. The world will call you cold. Let it. Cold steel cuts deeper than warm flesh. The world will call you distant. Good. Distance creates respect. The world will call you selfish. Perfect. You've finally learned the difference between self-care and self-destruction. But here's what they'll never tell you about this transformation. Once you taste this level of internal control, once you experience this degree of mental freedom, you'll never want to go back to being emotionally available to chaos. And that's when the real power begins. Here's the truth they'll never tell you. The truth that changes everything once you see it. Self-focus isn't about becoming powerful. You already are powerful. Self-focus is about stopping the leak. Every explanation you give, every reaction you have, every time you seek validation, you're not building power. You're hemorrhaging it. You've been walking through life with open wounds, bleeding energy, attention, and control to anyone who asks. The strongest men in history weren't strong because they gained something. They were strong because they stopped losing what they already had. You think you need to become more. You don't. You need to become less available, less reactive, less explainable, less understandable. Machiavelli's deepest insight wasn't about conquering others. It was about conquering yourself so completely that others naturally submit to your frame without you needing to force it. This is the final evolution. You stop trying to control the world and start controlling your response to it. You stop managing other people's perceptions and start managing your own energy. You stop building external power and start protecting internal sovereignty. The man who needs nothing from you cannot be manipulated by you. The man who explains nothing to you cannot be trapped by your logic. The man who reacts to nothing you do cannot be controlled by your provocations. That man becomes dangerous, not because he hurts people, but because he can't be hurt by people. Not because he dominates through force, but because he dominates through absence. Not because he takes power from others, but because he stops giving his power away. And when you reach that level, when you become emotionally bulletproof, mentally impenetrable, spiritually untouchable, something shifts in the fabric of reality around you. People start seeking your approval instead of you seeking theirs. They start explaining themselves to you instead of you explaining yourself to them. They start reacting to your silence instead of you reacting to their noise. You become the center of gravity in every room without saying a word. You become the standard against which others measure themselves without trying to impress anyone. You become the man who others whisper about because your presence creates questions they can't answer. This is what silent power looks like. This is what mental dominance feels like. This is what happens when you weaponize your focus and turn it inward like a laser. You don't become cold, you become steel. You don't become antisocial, you become selective. You don't become mysterious, you become sovereign. And sovereignty, real sovereignty, is the most dangerous thing a man can possess in a world designed to keep him dependent. The question that started this journey was whether you're ready to trade being understood for being powerful. But that was the wrong question. The right question is, are you ready to stop bleeding power and start being power? Because that choice, that single choice, separates kings from peasants, legends from forgotten names, men who build empires from men who beg for scraps. Self-focus is your weapon. Silence is your shield, and your mind, when disciplined, becomes your kingdom. Now the only question left is, will you rule it?